Hello everyone, it's Nigel Epsom here and welcome to part 2 of our Pianola series. In part 1 we spoke to family friend Patrick Hanscom about his lifetime interest in pianolas and many other things that he's done throughout his life, and this is part 2 where we're going to speak to my dad, who's another person who knows a lot about pianolas. We recorded this interview in one take, but I'm actually going to release it in 2 halves, so this part 2 and a subsequent part 3. Reason being, it's going to be quite a lot more technically heavy than part 1. So in this section, that is to say part 2, we're going to look at the basic workings of a pianola and how basic pianolas work and how they transfer noise from a paper tape to a piano string. And then in part 3, which I'll hopefully release about a week or so later once I've finished editing it, we'll go much deeper into some of the more complicated methods that pianolas use to reproduce sound accurately, mainly around volume control. So we're going to look at Ampico systems, Duo-Art systems, and so on and so forth. And that's going to be also quite technically heavy. So if that's the sort of thing you're interested in, please stick around and find out. Right, hello. We're here with Nigel Epsom, who's my father, who's going to talk to us today about pianolas.
Okay, so this is Player Pianos 101, sort of basic introduction to how they work. And we try not to get too involved in all the filigree bits, but just do the basic stuff. So I'm going to start drawing
On this piece of paper.
Okay, so all player, or nearly all player pianos work with vacuum, and that's produced by a pump. And the point of the vacuum is that it's going to actually activate all the 88 keys on the piano. Mm-hmm. But piano also has a couple of pedals, so the loud pedal, the sustain pedal, and the soft pedal. Mm-hmm. And also, one of the most important things is that the paper roll, which contains all the information, has to be moved so that the machine can read the information. So we need a roll motor, and that's also worked by the vacuum. Mm-hmm. And then there are some control functions. Mm-hmm. So everything works by vacuum, and the vacuum is produced by the pump. The pump can be driven by foot pump, so you can actually control it yourself, or it can be from a motor pump, which essentially just works the foot pump by cams, or sometimes they have a type of vacuum cleaner type, centrifugal type pump. Mm-hmm. So the most important thing then, if I move the paper along like a roll, the most important thing is these keys, of course. So the roll, you've seen the roll is actually read by a tracker bar. Mm-hmm. And the tracker bar has one hole per note per key. So there'd be 88 of these notes in, and the roll will then have corresponding perforations corresponding to these holes. So as the perforation passes over the hole, the note is played.
So the roll is moving like this.
The roll is moving generally like
88
that.
88 of these.
And 88 of those, yeah.
Yeah.
Each one of these then is connected by a tube to a little valve. And the valve then is connected to a sort of bellows, which collapses. So this will, when the vacuum is applied here, the air is sucked out of this bellows, and this then piece here moves vertically upwards and presses and activates the key on the piano.
And that interacts with the standard piano mechanism.
And then
right?
interacts with the standard piano mechanism, so the hammer will then go up and hit the string.
And when it hits the string, it does its normal motion of hitting the string, then springing back.
And coming back and being held. So if this is held collapsed,
yeah.
the hammer will stay engaged.
Yeah.
Just like you would play a normal piano.
Yes, so if this stays collapsed, it's the equivalent to
holding
down a note on a piano.
Yeah.
And the damper won't engage.
And the damper won't engage. The damper here has been lifted up, and so the string will sing its note.
And once that perforation has passed the relevant hole in the tracker bar, the paper is now covering that hole.
Yeah.
And at that point, the system
at that point, the vacuum is then no longer communicated because the valve has shut, and then instead of being vacuum here, there's atmospheric pressure, so it falls. This pneumatic falls back under its own weight,
yeah.
And that's like taking your finger off the other part of this is connected to the vacuum,
which is this vacuum over
which
here.
is that vacuum over there. But there's also a little vacuum connection which keeps this tube under vacuum until the hole comes over the tracker bar, opens this hole, then this vacuum collapses, and that activates the valve, which then sucks the air out of this pneumatic. So
I think it's worth emphasising for me, because I didn't really get this when I was younger, that what I thought happened when I was younger was that this hole moves over this hole, which collapses the vacuum, which directly actuates the bellows. But that couldn't happen.
No. So there's this intermediary valve in the way. So this is essentially a slave valve, which is operated by the perforation going over the tracker bar hole, operates this slave valve, which then allows a large amount of vacuum to move through very rapidly and collapse this.
This pipe here is far too small.
Yes, that pipe there is far too small. It's only about 3 millimeters in diameter, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's far too small to operate this pneumatic. The pneumatics are normally very, very closely associated with the valve. So this distance is only a few millimeters, maybe a centimeter, something. So
are they actually integrated into the bellows?
yes, and not that. Well, the bellows sit next to the valve in a big valve block.
Yeah.
So that they're very closely associated. So this distance is very small. Then there's a vacuum coming from the pump is a fairly large volume of vacuum as well. This bleed here, which sucks out this pipe here, is a very small orifice in it. So it takes time to re-establish the vacuum in this line here. So depending on the length of the line, it can operate maybe fast or slow, but it takes time for this to re-establish the vacuum. And there's all sorts of interesting ways of making this a little bit faster, which were developed later. Very interesting, but for basic understanding, not really required at this stage.
And there's 88 of these valves.
There's
and
88
of these bellows.
There's 88 of those valves, 88 of those bellows.
And because of that, the distance, the tracker bar is obviously about the width of this piece of paper that
Yes.
we're handily writing on, but the piano is somewhat wider than that. So the length of these pipes from the tracker bar to the equivalent valve varies.
Yes, so if in the middle of the piano, this distance is quite small. It varies from piano to piano, but when we move out here to the bass end or moved this way to the treble end of the piano, then they're getting longer. That's not necessarily the case in a grand installation. You've seen on Paddy Hanscom's piano that the pipes move to the outside, go through the key bed and down, so a lot of them are much the same length. So it's variable.
Okay, so that's the basic operation.
That's the basic operation. If we go one more complicated, if we think about the piano itself, so a piano with keys, we have 88 keys. We can split that into a bass end and a treble end, and we can then control the bass and the treble separately by changing the vacuum level here and the vacuum level here. So that was an easy way of controlling, having a little bit of control over the loudness of the notes, because the more vacuum we have, the faster the pneumatics will collapse, the louder the note will be. So if we can control the vacuum level one side and the other side, we have a little bit more control over the loudness. We can control the vacuum level by a number of means. The simplest way is to have a big vacuum pump here, often with a foot pump. So we have maybe a foot pump here, and we have two feeds, and we have two valves, which can control the vacuum level in the treble and in the bass. And these will normally be controlled by hand. So these are hand control valves. So we can then control the level of the loudness in the bass and the treble. We can take that one step higher, and that we can, on the roll, we can have little extra control perforations. We can call them snake bites because they look like two little perforations side by side, like you've been bitten by a snake. And these will then do something quite clever in that they will bypass this control valve. So this one will bypass, so the treble side will bypass the treble control valve, and the bass will bypass the bass control valve. So now we can play the treble, maybe controlled here by our hand valve at a lower level, and suddenly this snake bite will open. This then will open a way to go round the control valve and give us a sudden increase in vacuum, so we can play one note very loudly, because this snake bite will exactly conform to the perforation for the note that we want to emphasize, whereas the other notes will be in a different position and so won't be emphasized, because this bypass valve will be closed by the time those perforations come. And we can do that both sides.
So does this bypass valve, this what do you call this?
This bypass valve.
Yeah. This presumably has to act very quickly.
That can act very quickly. So it again has a control valve in between to make things very fast, because again we have only a small pipe here, and we need to have a big pipe operating this big valve here to let large quantities of vacuum through very quickly.
And roughly what sort of time periods are we dealing with here with this sort of thing?
We're talking about of the order of 25 milliseconds.
That's very quick for pneumatics, isn't it?
Yes, and that's why you need these slave valves, and you need the very large valve pouches which operate the valves very quickly, because you're talking quite a lot of force needed, because the vacuum levels are quite high, and because the valves are quite big. You've got quite a large vacuum on quite a big space, so you need quite a lot of force to operate that valve very quickly.
I think I've seen them. Are they the really big bellows that are underneath your machine on the...
No, you can't. They're buried inside one of the... This valve block here, these two valves and these bypass valves are all built together as a unitary unit, mostly, but they have quite a large valve which is pulled down by a big pouch, and the pouch will pull this down. Actually, the pouch will collapse, and then the vacuum will then force the valve open.
Yeah. So that's pretty impressive, this time period. I'm very impressed that it's that quick.
Yeah, so it's of that order. Remember, these paper is moving quite fast. I mean, this paper moves at 7 feet a minute. The holes are about 1/16 of an inch. So things can happen quite quickly with these. We're talking here of the order of 50 to 100 milliseconds.
Yeah.
So things can move quite quickly. And if you remember MP3, we know that the ear responds within about 50 milliseconds. So the guys who were doing this were good musicians. They knew about this stuff intuitively. They hadn't measured it, and they knew it had to happen quickly. They knew that they had to emphasize these loud notes rapidly, otherwise you get what some of the guys called a bidong effect, where the loud note is so much later or so much in front of the other notes that it's really noticeable that it's not playing at the same time. But we know from the MP3 system now that within about 50 milliseconds we don't really notice much difference.
Yeah.
The roll should move at the same speed, so there's another control mechanism for that. That gets very complicated, as you can imagine, as the roll passes. So it's pulled onto one cylinder, and as the roll rolls round the cylinder gets bigger, and if you're moving it at the cylinder at the same revolutions per minute, so the roll will move faster because the cylinder has got bigger. So there's all those little complications. Again, that's a lot of refinement that goes in. The guys who made the rolls knew that that was going to happen, and actually made the rolls a little bit longer. They put in extra rows in to allow for this acceleration as the roll moves forward. So there's lots of little refinements that are required, but we're talking basic stuff here.
So so to summarise at the moment, you've gone from a system where you just pull the roll over your piano and it collapses the vacuum in this bellows and it makes noise, and basically the harder you pedal, the louder it will be.
Yes.
But all the notes will be louder.
All the notes will be louder.
To a system where you either pedal or you have a motor, either way, and you can control the volume of the bass and the treble independently by lever.
Yes.
But also certain notes will automatically, on one side or the other, be emphasized to be extremely loud.
Yes.
And this system is called...
This is essentially called the Themodist system.
And you have one of these.
Not sure how to spell it. And this is what I have. It's a very basic, but it has the big advantage for the user is that I can control the loudness, both by pumping loud when this system is being bypassed. The harder I pump, then the louder these notes, the themed notes, will be. And by moving the levers, then it controls this general underneath level. So I have pretty complete control of how the music sounds, and that was a lovely selling point for the people who were using this, because then they were involved in music making
rather than just pumping,
rather than just being the person who supplied the energy.
Yeah. And so would they maybe have been like even a sort of amateur home pianist might have enjoyed?
Yes, yeah. I mean, a lot of these roles were for the amateur home pianist. For instance, there were roles that would be accompaniment to other pieces, so you could play this perhaps as an accompaniment to a violin piece, or four hands, two hands being supplied by this, and you supplying the two hands yourself, or a partner supplying the other two hands. So there were many variations on this. Again, getting people involved, a good selling point.
Yeah. Okay, so that is how the keys work on a general one, and you've also got pedals. Your roll motor you've touched on, which is usually it's governed.
Yes.
And it's on yours. It's a 3 bellows or 3-cylinder machine. Sometimes it's a 5-cylinder machine. Sometimes it's
yes. It depends on the various implementation, but yes, they're much of a muchness. They work by a number of these.
Yeah. Bellows.
Bellows working on a crankshaft.
Yeah.
Moving the roll
with a little link that opens and shuts the valve as they go.
Automatically valved,
to
yeah.
the timing.
A bit like a steam engine.
Yeah. The pedals, presumably on some rolls, they will be additional perforations that operate the sustain.
On most rolls, there's at least some perforations which operate the sustain. And on advanced rolls, there will also be holes mostly on the other side, which will operate the soft pedal. Pretty well every roll would have a sustain. Some of the early ones didn't have a sustain, but most of them.
Was that also included in most Themodist machines?
Yes, that would be included in most Themodist machines.
And I think you said earlier about the actual amount of vacuum needed for the sustain functions quite a lot.
The sustain function is quite a heavy movement. You have to lift all the dampers, so it's quite a heavy piece of equipment, and it has to happen fairly fast, so you need a lot of vacuum to do it. So that also uses a lot of vacuum. The motor roll, the roll motor uses a lot of vacuum. The pedals use a lot of vacuum. The actual keys, depending on how many keys are playing, can use a lot of vacuum or not, so that's variable. But we need to have a lot of power to operate the sustain pedal and the soft pedal, so that also needs their own control valves, big control valves, and also needs their own reservoirs to have enough vacuum to operate very rapidly.